I married a human who seemed weak, until our spaceship was invaded. Lyra moved through the corridors of the Silver Dawn with a calm, measured pace. The ship hummed around her, its engines vibrating softly beneath her feet. She had been aboard this vessel for several years, traveling through trade lanes and disputed territories. As a Velari, she had been trained in combat and leadership from birth. Every movement she made carried the weight of discipline, every glance held authority. She had been respected, feared, and admired wherever she went. But for all her confidence and skill, she had married a human named Luke Carter, a man who seemed so ordinary that many of her friends had warned her. Luke was small, with pale skin and soft brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. He had thin hands, hands made for delicate work, not for holding a weapon. His eyes were calm, warm, and intelligent, but they lacked the hard edge that Velari prized in their warriors. He walked behind her now, carrying a set of tools in a small case, humming quietly to himself as he checked a panel on the wall. Lyra's friends had often asked why she would choose someone so weak to share her life. Even some of the crew had made small jokes behind her back, whispering that the human would not survive long in space, much less alongside a Velari warrior like her. But Lyra had seen something in Luke that no one else noticed. He was quiet, yes, and careful, but he never panicked. He observed before acting. He thought before moving. In his calm, almost invisible way, he had survived things that would have broken other humans. And somehow, in his steady presence, Lyra found a comfort she had never known among her own kind. The Silver Dawn was a medium-sized trade ship, with metal walls that gleamed faintly under the soft lighting. Pipes and wires ran along the ceiling, and the hum of machinery was constant. Luke moved like he belonged here, though not in the way a Velari would. He did not stride with authority or give orders. Instead, he checked circuits, inspected pressure seals, and tested life support systems. He had a careful touch, one that had kept the ship running smoothly for months. Lyra had to admit, even to herself, that the ship felt safer with him aboard. "Luke," Lyra said softly as she walked down the corridor, "don't forget to run a check on the secondary engines. We don't want any surprises in the jump tomorrow." Luke looked up, smiling faintly. "Already done. I ran the diagnostics twice this morning. Everything's stable." Lyra paused and studied him for a moment. He could have been just another quiet engineer, one she might have married because of convenience or politeness. But there was something else there, something no one else seemed to understand. He had patience, a clear mind, and the ability to see the hidden problems before they became real dangers. That skill had saved them more than once, though quietly and without recognition. As they moved to the main deck, the rest of the crew began their routines. There were Velari officers, humans like Luke, and a few other alien species who traveled with them for trade, exploration, or survival. Some glanced at Luke and whispered. A young Velari named Saren, who often challenged Lyra on command decisions, shook his head slightly as Luke passed by. "I don't know why she married him," he muttered to a colleague. "The human can barely lift a plasma wrench. He's soft." His companion snorted quietly. "Maybe she likes soft things," he replied, and both laughed under their breath. Lyra did not hear them, but Luke did. He glanced at them with a small, polite smile and went back to his panel, completely unfazed. It was that calm that made Lyra love him. No matter the insult, no matter the sneer, Luke remained steady. Unlike her people who reacted with anger, pride, or force, he waited. He watched, and somehow his quiet mind seemed to anticipate danger long before it arrived. The Silver Dawn was not a warship. It carried trade goods, passengers, and occasionally sensitive technology. But even on a peaceful voyage, danger was never far. Pirates, raiders, and hostile aliens lurked in every disputed sector. Most ships relied on heavy weapons, strong crews, and fast jumps to survive. The Silver Dawn relied on Lyra's leadership and, unbeknownst to most, Luke's clever mind. He had studied the ship system so thoroughly that he could find weaknesses and solutions faster than anyone else aboard. "Lyra, you'll want to look at the coolant array in Sector 7, Luke said, pointing to a small panel on the wall. "It's stable for now, but a minor fluctuation could affect the jump engines if we don't address it. I've set a temporary bypass, but we should schedule a full repair." Lyra's eyes softened. "You always see what I miss," she said. She had grown accustomed to relying on him in ways she would never admit to the crew. She did not need a strong fighter beside her. She needed a sharp mind, a steady heart, and someone who did not panic when everything around them was falling apart. Luke smiled again and shrugged. "Just doing my job." The corridors smelled faintly of ozone and metal, the scent of a ship alive with energy. Luke moved with purpose, bending over panels, tightening circuits, and testing valves. He seemed small and fragile compared to the Velari around him, but there was a quiet power in his work. Lyra knew that if anything went wrong aboard this ship, he would not flinch. Later in the crew mess, Luke sat quietly at a table, eating a simple meal of nutrient paste and water. Lyra joined him, carrying a plate of slightly spiced food, a small indulgence for herself. She watched as he ate calmly, almost meditatively, ignoring the loud conversation of Velari officers around him. "Luke," she said softly, "do you ever get bored of all this quiet work?" He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "No, I like knowing how things work. I like keeping things running. Chaos is worse when it comes without warning." Lyra smiled. She had learned long ago that humans had a strange kind of strength. They were not always strong in the obvious ways like muscle or speed, but they endured. They adapted. They thought ahead. Luke's strength was invisible, like the gravity that held the ship together. Most people ignored it, but it was essential. Around them, the crew laughed, argued, and played small games to pass the long hours of space travel. Some looked at Luke and shook their heads. A young Velari woman, Yara, whispered to a friend, "I don't understand why anyone would marry a human. They are so weak." Her friend frowned. "He might be clever, but he looks like he would break if a meteor hit him." Lyra's hands tightened slightly around her food. She did not answer. She did not need to. The proof was in how he handled himself every day, in the quiet way he kept the ship alive. That evening, Luke walked with Lyra to the observation deck. Stars stretched endlessly across the black void, distant suns twinkling like scattered jewels. Lyra leaned on the railing, watching the light of a nearby planet glow softly. Luke stood beside her, hands behind his back, looking at the same view. "You ever wonder why we survive?" Lyra asked. "Most ships get picked apart in this sector. How have we made it this far?" Luke smiled faintly. "We plan, we adapt, and we don't panic. That's how humans survive." "You Velari fight well, yes, but even the strongest can fail if they lose control. Calmness, patience, that is sometimes more powerful than any weapon." Lyra nodded slowly, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She had known humans were resilient, but she was only now realizing the depth of it. Luke's strength was subtle, quiet, invisible until it was needed most. And when it was needed, it would be unstoppable. The night passed slowly, and the silver dawn hummed beneath them. Luke worked into the late hours, checking systems, tightening screws, running diagnostics. Lyra watched him from the doorway, amazed at how focused he could be. He looked like an ordinary man, but she knew better. Every careful movement, every patient calculation, told her a story of endurance, intelligence, and quiet courage. As she finally turned to rest, she thought about the crew, about the whispers and doubts. Let them think he was weak. Let them doubt him. One day the truth would show itself and no one would forget it. And Lyra, the Velari warrior, the one who had seen empires rise and fall, knew she had married something rare, something extraordinary. She had married a human who seemed weak. And yet she already trusted him more than anyone she had ever known. In the quiet hum of the ship, she whispered to herself, "You are stronger than they will ever know, Luke Carter. And when the time comes, you will prove it." Outside the observation deck, the stars stretched endlessly, silent witnesses to the lives aboard the Silver Dawn. And though nothing had happened yet, Lyra felt the shift in the air. Something was coming. She could not see it. She could not name it. But she knew that when it arrived, Luke would be ready. He always was. And that knowledge, more than any weapon or skill, gave her hope. The hum of the Silver Dawn had always been a comforting sound, like the heartbeat of a living creature. Tonight, however, it was broken by a sudden, shrill alarm that rang through the corridors, making the crew jump and spin toward their stations. Red lights flashed across the walls, painting the metal floors in streaks of urgency. Lyra's heart tightened as she ran toward the bridge, the sound of her boots clanging against the deck echoing in the long corridors. Luke was already moving, carrying his small tool case with practiced ease. He did not run, did not panic, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He had sensed this long before the alarm, reading the subtle vibrations of the ship's engines and the irregularities in sensor readings. Lyra had watched him move in moments like this before and had always been impressed. There was no fear in him, only focus. "Luke, report," Lyra shouted as she reached the bridge. "We're under attack," he said calmly. "Multiple boarding ships detected. They are using plasma cutters to breach the outer hull on Deck 3. The bridge crew reacted instantly, shouting orders and moving to their positions. Velari officers prepared weapons, humans tried to stabilize the shields, and the ship's automated defenses powered up with rapid efficiency. Lyra took her place at the command station, issuing commands as she had been trained, but she could not help glancing at Luke. He was already moving toward the maintenance shafts, small and unarmed, yet purposeful. "Luke, stay here," she ordered. He shook his head slightly. "I can help more if I work from the systems. I know the layouts. I know the weak points. I can slow them down." Lyra wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. She had relied on him too many times to stop arguing now. She only nodded. "Be careful." Luke slipped into the maintenance corridors, his small frame weaving through pipes and narrow shafts. The boarding party had already breached one of the outer airlocks, and the sounds of their invasion echoed through the walls, metal scraping, alarms blaring, and shouted orders in a language none of the crew understood. Lyra gritted her teeth and took a deep breath. This was not just a raid. This was a test, and she knew deep down that Luke would meet it in his own way. The invaders were not ordinary pirates. They were seasoned fighters, heavily armed, and they moved with terrifying precision. Their armor clanged as they stormed through the outer decks, plasma rifles in hand, cutting through doors and barriers as if they were nothing. Most crews would have panicked, but the Silver Dawn was different. Lyra's leadership kept most of the crew steady, while Luke's quiet genius would turn the ship into something they could not predict. Luke crouched near a junction panel, his fingers flying over switches and wires. He rerouted power from secondary engines to reinforce bulkhead doors, sealed compartments, and activated emergency protocols that the invaders did not anticipate. One by one, the hallways became traps. Doors slammed shut behind the raiders, isolating them in small sections. Luke had memorized the layout of the ship down to the smallest pipe, and he used it like a chessboard, moving his pieces while the enemy stumbled blindly into corners. On the bridge, Lyra shouted orders to her crew, directing them to hold choke points and secure vital systems. The Velari fired with precision, but the enemy was relentless. Plasma bolts tore through walls, sparking as they hit metal. The ship shuddered under each hit, and smoke began to fill some of the lower decks. Yet through it all, Luke moved calmly, efficiently, guiding crew members through maintenance shafts and hidden passages. "Follow me," he said to a group of panicked humans, pointing to a narrow service tunnel. "If you stay here, you'll be trapped. This way is safer. Move quickly but stay quiet." They hesitated, staring at him in disbelief. You're not afraid?" one asked. Luke shook his head. "Fear won't help us. Stay calm, stay focused, and follow my instructions. You'll make it." They followed him, wide-eyed but obedient. Lyra watched from above, her chest swelling with pride. The human she had married, the one everyone had called weak, was saving lives while the Velari fighters struggled to keep up with the chaos. On Deck 3, a small group of invaders tried to break through a reinforced hatch. Luke had anticipated this. He had already rerouted pressure in the corridor, creating a sudden burst of force that knocked the intruders off their feet. He then tripped the emergency gas vents, filling the hallway with a non-lethal but disorienting mist. The invaders coughed and staggered, unaware that Luke had already escaped to the next junction. From above, Lyra fired a plasma rifle, targeting anyone who came too close to vital systems. She could see Luke moving like a shadow through the chaos, calm and precise, and it sent a strange sense of awe through her. He did not fight like a Velari. He did not charge, yell, or rely on brute strength, but every action he took was effective. Every decision he made slowed the invaders and saved lives. The ship's engines shuddered again as a plasma bolt hit the port side, and alarms screamed even louder. Lyra's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady, issuing orders with authority. The crew responded because of her, yes, but also because of Luke. She could see how he moved, how he anticipated the enemy, and how the crew instinctively followed him when he guided them. "Luke, status," she demanded over the comms. "Section 3 secured for now," he replied calmly. "I've trapped the invaders in 2 corridors. They can't reach the main engines without passing through multiple sealed areas. I'm moving toward the bridge next." Lyra's eyes widened. He was going to help defend the bridge. She had expected him to stay behind in the maintenance areas, but he was already thinking ahead, planning their defense like a master strategist. As he moved, he encountered a pair of invaders trying to cut through a panel. Luke grabbed a heavy wrench from his case, swinging it with precision. The first attacker froze, stunned by the unexpected force, and the second tried to reach him with a plasma blade. Luke ducked, twisted, and struck a perfect blow that sent the weapon clattering across the deck. The invaders went down, and Luke did not pause, moving on to the next threat with calm efficiency. Back on the bridge, Lyra's heart pounded, but she felt an unshakable trust in him. He was quiet, unassuming, and seemingly ordinary, but in moments like this he became extraordinary. He turned the ship itself into a weapon, using systems, layouts, and quick thinking instead of brute force. "Luke, get to the main corridor," Lyra ordered. "We need to protect the central reactor." "I know," he replied over the comm. "I'm already there. I have a plan to slow them down further." By now, the invaders were frustrated. They had expected the usual panic, the usual fear. They had expected the humans and aliens aboard to scramble or surrender. Instead, they found a ship full of calm, methodical resistance, and a small, unarmed human at the center of it all, turning the very halls of the ship into traps. One of the raiders tried to cut through a sealed bulkhead, thinking it would give them access to the engine room. Luke activated a nearby gravity panel, shifting the floor just enough to make the raider lose balance. He tumbled into the corridor, stunned and disoriented. Luke did not stop to strike. He had already moved to reroute power, sealing another section behind him. Lyra could see the tide turning, not because of weapons but because of strategy. She realized something she had always known but never fully understood. Humans survived not by strength alone but by intelligence, adaptability, and patience. Luke embodied all of these traits. He did not fight for glory. He fought for survival, and he fought to protect the crew. The invaders began to retreat slightly, confused by the traps, doors, and sudden obstacles that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Luke had used the ship itself as a weapon, guiding the crew, isolating enemies, and creating choke points where the Velari fighters could strike with maximum efficiency. Lyra finally allowed herself a small smile. Her husband, the man everyone had underestimated, was proving that weakness was not what it seemed. Calmness, patience, and cleverness were just as deadly as the strongest weapon. In the chaos, Luke moved to help a group of frightened humans trapped in a cargo bay. He calmly guided them through a side passage, reassured them, and ensured they stayed safe. Not one of them questioned him. They trusted him completely, instinctively, because he radiated control and certainty in a way no Velari could match. By the time the invaders realized the ship's layout was working against them, it was too late. Two boarding parties were isolated, trapped in small sections. Luke had rerouted power to lock doors, set automated defenses, and even rerouted environmental controls to disorient the attackers. He moved quickly, efficiently, always one step ahead. Lyra could not stop watching him. She had married a man who seemed fragile, weak, and ordinary, but in the heat of battle he was extraordinary. He did not charge, yell, or demand attention. He acted, planned, and saved lives with calm precision. The whispers of the crew, the doubts of her friends, the jokes of young Velari, they all seemed meaningless now. The Silver Dawn had survived countless challenges, but never like this. Never with such quiet brilliance at its center. And Lyra, standing at the bridge, giving orders and watching Luke move through the chaos, realized something that filled her with awe. She had married a human, yes, but she had married a genius of survival, a master of strategy, and a quiet force that no one would ever forget. And though the invaders still pressed forward, the tide had already shifted. Luke had shown them that the quiet human they had underestimated was the one who controlled the battlefield, even without a weapon in his hand. Luke moved through the narrow maintenance shafts with quiet confidence. The metallic walls pressed close to him, and the dim lights flickered as sparks from damaged circuits danced along the pipes. He carried his tool case in one hand, a few spare panels under the other arm, and his mind worked faster than the alarms around him. Every sensor reading, every vibration in the ship, every movement of the invaders passed through his mind and formed a plan almost instinctively. The invaders had expected chaos. They had expected the humans and Velari aboard to panic, to make mistakes, to surrender when the first boarding party broke through. Instead, they faced a man who seemed ordinary but moved with precision, calm, and strategy. Luke did not need weapons to defend the ship. The ship itself became his arsenal. He rerouted power, manipulated doors, and controlled gravity panels to force the intruders into narrow passages where they could not fight effectively. He paused at a junction where two corridors met. Ahead, he could hear the low hum of armored boots and the hiss of plasma cutters. A small group of raiders was trying to force open a bulkhead to reach the main engine. Luke studied the panel beside him and pressed a few buttons. The doors hissed and the floor shuddered. When the invaders stepped forward, the floor shifted slightly, throwing them off balance. They stumbled, cursing in their guttural language. Luke did not wait. He ducked under a hanging pipe and activated a small gas vent. The hallway filled with a dense, non-lethal mist, blinding the attackers and masking his movements. Luke used the opportunity to slip past them, moving toward another corridor that led to the reactor control room. He paused only briefly to help a young human technician who had tripped over a wire. "Stay calm," he said quietly. "I'll get you out safely." The technician nodded, too shocked to speak, and followed him through a narrow maintenance tunnel that the invaders could not access. Lyra, watching from the bridge, felt her chest tighten. She had trained for battles, led fleets, and faced enemies more terrifying than these raiders, but she had never seen a human handle danger like this. Luke moved not with speed or brute strength, but with intelligence. He predicted the enemy's actions before they happened. He controlled the environment around him. He saved lives without anyone realizing how much danger they were in. The invaders grew frustrated. They had expected the human to be weak, to panic, or to hide. Instead, they found a man who moved like a shadow through the ship, appearing in places they did not expect, disrupting their plans without warning. Some of them tried to catch him, But the corridors were narrow, and Luke used every twist and turn to his advantage. He tripped a lever that released a small compartment hatch, sending one raider tumbling into a storage bay full of metal crates. Another tried to swing a plasma blade, but Luke ducked and activated a panel that sent a controlled spark across the floor, forcing him back. Luke reached a small control room near the main reactor. He crouched beside the console, quickly checking systems and rerouting power. If the invaders reached the reactor, they could destroy the ship in minutes. He could not allow that. He activated emergency locks, sealing the reactor in a protective shell that only he could override. Then he moved to the side corridors, setting traps and barriers to delay any attackers. Every movement was precise, every decision deliberate. Meanwhile, Lyra fought to maintain control on the bridge. She gave orders, coordinated defense teams, and kept the shield stable. Yet she could not help but glance at the security feeds, where Luke appeared over and over, small and unarmed, yet turning the ship into a fortress. One moment, he was guiding terrified humans through maintenance shafts. The next, he was activating bulkhead doors to trap raiders in small compartments. Lyra realized that no matter how skilled she was as a warrior, she had never faced an ally like him. A sudden alarm echoed through the ship. One of the raiders had broken through a secondary door and was approaching the central corridor. Luke moved toward them calmly. He did not shout, did not panic. He pressed a panel on the wall, and a section of the floor dropped slightly, sending the intruder off balance. The raider tried to recover, but Luke had already activated a vent that released a thick, smoke-like mist. The attacker coughed and stumbled, blinded, and Luke used a small tool to create a temporary magnetic pulse that disrupted his weapons. The intruder went down without a fight, and Luke continued forward. He paused briefly to check on the humans he had guided earlier. They were safe in a secure compartment, wide-eyed but unharmed. Luke nodded to them and moved on, knowing there were more threats ahead. Every section of the ship was different, and every corridor offered new challenges. But Luke had studied this ship for months, memorizing every passage, every vent, every hidden panel. He used that knowledge like a weapon. In one narrow hallway, a group of 3 raiders cornered him. They laughed, thinking the small human would be easy prey. Luke did not flinch. He grabbed a heavy wrench from his case, using it not just to strike but to manipulate the environment. He pulled a panel from the wall, dropping it behind him to block one path, then swung the wrench to knock a weapon out of another attacker's hand. The third tried to rush him, but Luke ducked and activated a small control panel on the floor, sending a minor shock that forced the raider to stumble back. Within moments, all 3 were disoriented, and Luke slipped past them as if they had never been there. The invaders were growing desperate. They had expected to overwhelm the crew with weapons and force, but they had underestimated the intelligence of a human who knew the ship better than anyone else. Luke's calm mind and precise actions were turning their attack into chaos. He reached the main corridor leading to the bridge, where Lyra and the Velari officers were holding the line. He paused, catching his breath for a moment, then activated a sequence that rerouted power to security doors, creating narrow choke points where the crew could strike effectively. He even controlled environmental panels, lowering gravity slightly to slow the invaders while keeping the defenders steady. Lyra watched in amazement as the raiders struggled to move through the corridors. They had superior strength, weapons, and armor, but the ship itself was working against them, and Luke was the unseen hand guiding it. She could not help but feel a surge of pride and awe. The human she had married, the man everyone had called weak, was now the key to their survival. Luke moved down another service tunnel, encountering a raider who had broken through a side panel. The attacker raised a plasma blade, ready to strike, but Luke did not panic. He kicked a small lever on the floor, sending a magnetic pulse that disrupted the raider's weapon. Then, with a quick swing of his wrench, He knocked the attacker off balance and sent him sliding into a stack of crates. Luke did not wait. He moved on, setting additional traps and activating panels to guide other intruders into controlled areas. The rest of the crew began to notice the effect of his actions. Panic among the humans lessened as they followed Luke's guidance through maintenance tunnels and hidden passages. The Velari fighters realized that the human they had underestimated was controlling the battlefield, not with strength, but with strategy and intelligence. Even the ship itself seemed to obey him, as if it recognized the calm authority in his movements. As the hours passed, the tide of the battle shifted. The invaders were no longer advancing freely. They were trapped, slowed, and disoriented at every turn. Luke continued to move through the ship, checking systems, sealing doors, and guiding crew members. His calmness never wavered, even when a plasma blast rocked the corridor he had just passed through. He paused for a moment in a small maintenance bay, listening to the hum of the ship and the distant sounds of the battle. He could hear the attackers regrouping, trying to find new paths, but every move they made played into his plan. He had anticipated their actions, set traps in advance, and guided the defenders to the most effective positions. The ship had become a maze and the invaders were trapped within it. Lyra, on the bridge, felt a mix of pride and relief. The battle was far from over, but with Luke's guidance, they had turned the ship into a fortress. She could see the invaders, frustration growing on the monitors. They had expected an easy victory, and had instead found themselves outsmarted by a human who seemed ordinary, unarmed, and fragile. Luke moved again, this time toward the cargo hold where a group of raiders had trapped a small group of humans. He guided the crew members out through hidden passages, using his knowledge of the ship to keep them safe. The invaders tried to follow, but Luke had anticipated this. He sealed doors behind them, redirected power to slow their movements, and even used gravity controls to make their progress slower and more difficult. By the time he reached the bridge again, the invaders were in disarray. Their attacks were uncoordinated, their progress slow, and their frustration obvious. Luke had turned the ship itself into a weapon, and the crew's confidence had grown because of him. Lyra could finally breathe a little easier, knowing that the man she had married, the one everyone had underestimated, was leading them to survival. Luke glanced at her briefly as he arrived on the bridge. She could see the calm determination in his eyes, the same quiet confidence he had shown from the very beginning. He did not boast, he did not seek recognition, but his actions spoke louder than any words. The invaders had learned something important. A human's strength was not always obvious, and underestimating one could be fatal. And Luke Carter, the human everyone had thought weak, was proving that tonight. The corridors of the Silver Dawn were quiet for the first time since the attack began, though the faint hum of the ship and the distant alarms reminded everyone that the battle was not yet over. The raiders had been slowed, trapped, and confused, but some still moved through the ship, searching for a way to strike back. Luke walked steadily through one of the narrow service tunnels, his mind focused on what needed to be done next. He paused for a moment, listening to the sounds of the ship. There were faint clanks, the hiss of energy vents, and the low murmur of frightened crew members moving carefully through secured paths. He had led most of the humans to safety, guided Velari fighters to effective positions, and set traps that made the invaders hesitate. Now it was time to teach them something they would not forget. Luke stopped at a junction where 3 corridors met. He could see a small group of raiders moving cautiously through one of the paths, trying to flank the crew stationed in the bridge. He crouched behind a maintenance panel and whispered into a small comm unit, "Keep calm. Don't move until I give the signal." The humans he had guided nodded, their faces pale but determined. They trusted him completely because he had guided them through danger with steady hands and a calm voice. Fear did not make him panic. Threats did not make him rush blindly. Every step he took was measured, deliberate, and effective. He moved quickly through the vents above the corridor, silently dropping down behind the raiders. They were confident, thinking the humans were weak and unorganized. Luke smiled faintly. They would soon learn that their confidence was misplaced. He pressed a button on a control panel hidden in the wall. A section of the corridor floor shifted slightly, causing the first raider to stumble. Another tried to fire a plasma weapon, but Luke activated a magnetic pulse that disrupted the weapon's function. The last raider turned to confront him, but Luke had already grabbed a loose metal pipe and used it to knock the intruder off balance. Within moments, all three were disoriented, trapped, and unable to continue their attack. Luke did not celebrate or pause. He moved to the side corridor, activating additional panels and vents to slow any other intruders. He guided the crew through hidden passages, ensuring everyone remained safe. His calmness was contagious. Even the Velari fighters who had once doubted him began to trust his judgment and follow his lead without question. Once the immediate threat was neutralized, Luke called the nearest crew members together in a secured maintenance bay. The humans and a few Velari huddled close, looking at him with wide eyes. "Listen carefully," he said. "You need to understand why we survive. It's not just strength, it's patience, observation, and thinking ahead. Panic will get you killed. Calmness will save you. Every decision matters, no matter how small." One young human asked hesitantly, "But how do we know what to do?" "They're stronger, faster, and have better weapons." Luke smiled gently. "Strength and weapons matter only if you use them wisely. Humans learn to survive by noticing patterns, understanding their environment, and waiting for the right moment. Sometimes the best action is not fighting directly. Sometimes it is using the environment against your enemy. That is what we have done here. That is why we are alive." He led them to a small panel and demonstrated how to reroute power to doors and vents, creating traps that could stop the invaders. He showed them how to move quietly through maintenance shafts, avoid detection, and guide others safely. The crew watched closely, learning from a human who seemed ordinary but had the mind of a strategist. Meanwhile, Lyra coordinated from the bridge, using Luke's instructions and the crew's new confidence to strengthen their defenses. The raiders tried to regroup and find new paths, but Luke had anticipated almost every possible move. Doors slammed shut behind them, corridors shifted, and environmental panels disoriented them. Every action the intruders took only worked in favor of the crew. Luke moved quickly from corridor to corridor, checking on trapped crew members, resetting temporary barriers, and setting up new traps. He used the ship itself as a weapon. Gravity panels, pressure locks, and power reroutes became extensions of his will. Every action was deliberate, precise, and calculated. The invaders were frustrated, confused, and increasingly desperate. They had expected an easy victory and had underestimated the intelligence of a human. At one point, he encountered a larger group of raiders trying to breach the reactor control room. They were armed, armored, and confident. Luke assessed the situation quickly. He activated a control panel that released a small amount of smoke into the hallway. The raiders coughed, waved their hands, and struggled to see. Luke then used a series of levers to shift the floor slightly, making it difficult for them to stand or aim. He moved among them like a shadow, using their confusion against them. A stray plasma bolt ricocheted off the wall, but Luke stayed calm, guiding them into traps and ensuring they could not reach the reactor. Within minutes, the invaders were either disarmed, trapped, or fleeing back down corridors they could no longer navigate. Luke paused for a moment, catching his breath. The battle had been long, and the ship had taken some damage, but the crew's morale had improved. The humans he had guided were no longer panicked. They had seen firsthand the power of calm, thought-out actions. Even the Velari fighters who had once doubted him now respected his skill and intelligence. He moved toward the main observation deck to meet Lyra. She was standing at the railing, watching the stars, but she turned as he approached. "How are things?" she asked. Luke shook his head slightly. "The immediate threat is contained. Most of the raiders are trapped or retreating. The crew is safe. We have time to reinforce critical systems before they regroup." Lyra studied him, awe in her eyes. You've done more than anyone expected. You've turned the ship itself into a weapon. How do you stay so calm?" Luke shrugged. "I think about what matters. Panic doesn't help. Strength doesn't always help. We survive by thinking, by observing, and by using what we have. Humans learn that from birth. We adapt. We endure. We wait for the right moment." She nodded slowly. "I see now why you're different. I see why I married you. You are extraordinary." Luke smiled faintly. "Extraordinary? No, just human, and humans survive, that's all." For the next few hours, Luke moved through the ship, checking systems, guiding crew members, and reinforcing barriers. He taught humans how to use the ship systems to their advantage, showing them how small actions could stop much larger threats. He remained calm under fire, never rushing, never panicking, always thinking one step ahead. The invaders tried to push forward, but every time they did, Luke was there. Not with brute strength, but with intelligence, precision, and calm authority. They could not anticipate him, could not outmaneuver him, and could not understand how a human could turn a ship into a fortress without a weapon in hand. By the time the first light of the nearby star reached the observation deck, the battle was almost over. The invaders had lost coordination, suffered heavy losses, and realized they had underestimated the humans aboard the Silver Dawn. Luke had shown them that patience, intelligence, and calmness could defeat even the strongest and most aggressive enemies. He returned to Lyra on the observation deck. She smiled, her eyes reflecting both relief and pride. "You've done it," she said. Luke shook his head. "Not me alone. The crew helped. We all survived because we stayed calm, worked together, and used what we had. But humans survive because we endure, adapt, and never give up. That's why we're still here." Lyra reached out and took his hand, feeling the strength in his quiet presence. "I knew there was more to you than anyone saw," she said softly. "But now the galaxy will know." Luke looked out at the stars, the same stars that had seemed so distant and dangerous just hours ago. "Let them know," he said quietly. "But remember, it's not about fear or strength. It's about thinking, observing, and surviving. That's the real power." The crew began to regroup, repairing systems, checking for damage, and preparing for the next jump. The Velari officers no longer doubted Luke. The humans no longer feared the fight. And Lyra knew, deep in her heart, that she had married someone extraordinary, not because of strength or speed, but because of intelligence, calmness, and the unshakable will to survive. As the Silver Dawn sailed through the void, the ship scarred but intact, Luke moved among the crew, checking systems, helping with repairs, and quietly guiding them. He did not seek recognition, praise, or glory. He simply did what needed to be done, and that was enough. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, silent witnesses to the human who had turned the tide of the battle. Luke Carter, quiet, calm, ordinary seeming, had shown the galaxy the true strength of humanity. He had turned panic into order, chaos into strategy, and weakness into survival. Lyra watched him for a long moment, feeling a deep sense of pride and awe. She had married a human who seemed weak, yes, but now she understood. He was far from weak. He was patient, clever, and unstoppable when it mattered most. The invaders would flee. The crew would survive. And the galaxy, if it learned of this battle, would never again underestimate a human. Luke returned to the observation deck beside Lyra, quiet but satisfied. The battle had tested them, taught them, and revealed truths that could not be ignored. The human mind, the calm heart, the careful thinking, it had won. And in that moment, Lyra knew without doubt that she had chosen wisely. She had married a human, a quiet, unassuming man who had just saved her life, the lives of the crew, and the Silver Dawn itself. And when the galaxy next spoke of humans, it would speak of survivors, strategists, and thinkers who could turn the impossible into reality. Luke looked at Lyra, smiled faintly, and whispered, "We survived. That's what humans do." Lyra squeezed his hand, her heart full. And now the galaxy will know. The Silver Dawn floated through the calm space lanes, its hull scarred and dented from the attack, but its systems humming steadily once more. The crew moved with purpose, checking panels, repairing doors, and ensuring that the ship was ready for the next jump. The battle was over, the invaders scattered and defeated, but the memory of the chaos lingered in the minds of everyone aboard. Luke walked quietly through the corridors, his tool case in hand, checking systems as always. He moved with the same calm, deliberate steps he had used throughout the battle. There was no rush, no panic. Every action was precise, every decision thoughtful. He was ordinary in appearance, unassuming, but the events of the past hours had shown everyone just how extraordinary he really was. The humans he had guided during the battle were no longer frightened or uncertain. They moved with confidence, following his instructions, repairing what needed repair, and helping each other. They had learned something invaluable, that intelligence, calmness, and strategy could be more powerful than strength or weaponry. The Velari, once skeptical of Luke's abilities, now looked at him with respect. Officers who had doubted him or whispered about his weakness approached him cautiously, seeking advice, guidance, and understanding. They had underestimated the quiet human engineer, and now they knew their mistake. Lyra walked beside him, watching the crew work and noting the shift in attitude. She felt a deep pride and awe as she glanced at Luke. He had not sought glory or recognition. He had simply done what needed to be done, and in doing so, had saved everyone aboard the Silver Dawn. "You've done it again," she said softly, her voice carrying over the hum of machinery. "You've saved us all." Luke glanced at her with a faint smile. "We all did it," he replied. "I just guided the way. Humans survive by thinking, observing, and staying calm. That's all. The rest comes naturally when you work together." Lyra shook her head. "It's more than that. You've changed how everyone sees humans now. They will never underestimate us again." Luke shrugged modestly, but there was a small glint of pride in his eyes. "They'll see. That's fine. We don't need their respect to survive. We survive because we endure, adapt, and act when it matters. That's what humans do." As the ship glided toward the next star system, the captain of the Silver Dawn, a Velari named Saren, called a meeting on the bridge. The surviving crew gathered, some limping, some tired, but all alive. Luke took a place near Lyra, standing quietly as the captain addressed them. "Crew," Saren began, his voice firm but filled with respect, "we have faced one of the most dangerous raids in this sector, and we have survived. That survival is due to our collective efforts, but one member of this crew deserves special recognition. Luke Carter, human engineer, has guided us, saved lives, and turned our ship into a fortress when we faced overwhelming odds. He has proven that humans are not weak, as some of us believed, but strong in ways we could not have imagined." Luke felt his face flush slightly, but he remained calm. He did not seek attention, did not speak up, but the crew around him nodded in agreement. Murmurs of approval spread through the room. The humans he had guided whispered thanks, the Velari officers nodded in respect, and even some of the other alien crew members looked at him with admiration. Saren continued, "We have learned something valuable today. Strength is not always visible. Bravery is not always loud. And intelligence, patience, and calmness can defeat even the strongest enemy. Let this be a lesson to us all. Humans are capable, resilient, and deadly when underestimated. Luke Carter has shown us this, and we owe our lives to him." Lyra's eyes glistened with pride. She had known this all along, but hearing it from others made her heart swell. She reached out, lightly touching Luke's arm, a silent acknowledgement of what he had done. Luke looked at her, a small, humble smile on his face, and nodded slightly. After the meeting, the crew returned to their duties, but the mood had changed. Where there had been doubt, fear, or skepticism, there was now respect and trust. Humans were no longer seen as weak or fragile. Luke's actions had rewritten the perception of his species aboard the Silver Dawn. In the quiet of the observation deck, Luke and Lyra stood side by side, looking out at the stars. The blackness of space stretched endlessly before them, punctuated by distant suns and planets. The stars were calm now, in stark contrast to the chaos they had faced hours earlier. "You were amazing," Lyra said softly. "I knew you were clever, but seeing you in action, it's beyond what I imagined." Luke shrugged modestly. "I just did what I had to do. Every human has the ability to think, adapt, and survive. I just acted when it mattered." She smiled, shaking her head. "You make it sound so simple, but you saved us all. Not just the humans, not just the Velari, but everyone aboard this ship. That takes more than skill. It takes courage, patience, and something more, something I can't explain." Luke looked at her, his calm expression softening. "It's called survival. Humans learn it early. We endure, we adapt, and we think before we act. That's how we survive in a world full of dangers. Space is no different." They stood quietly for a few moments, watching the stars pass by, each lost in thought. The battle had tested them, shown them weaknesses, and revealed strengths they had not known existed. Luke's calm presence had turned a desperate situation into a victory, and now the crew's respect for humans had shifted forever. Later, as the ship continued on its course, the crew began to repair the damage. Doors were fixed, panels replaced, and hull sections reinforced. Luke moved through the corridors, quietly checking systems, offering guidance, and helping wherever he could. He did not seek praise, but the crew watched him with renewed admiration. Every small action he took reminded them of the strength of humans, not strength of muscle, but strength of mind, patience, and endurance. A young Velari officer approached him cautiously. "Luke," she said, I underestimated you. You are more capable than I imagined." "I apologize for doubting you," Luke nodded politely. "It's all right, most people do. Humans seem weak at first, but that is part of how we survive. We endure quietly until the moment comes when we need to act." The officer looked thoughtful. "I will remember that. I will not underestimate humans again." Luke smiled faintly. "Good. That's all I ask." As the day turned to night aboard the Silver Dawn, Luke and Lyra found themselves alone in the quiet of the ship's observation deck. The stars were beautiful, distant, and calm, a stark contrast to the chaos that had shaken them just hours before. Lyra reached out, taking Luke's hand, and squeezed it gently. "You've changed everything," she said softly. "Not just for the crew, but for the way the galaxy will see humans. You've shown them our true strength." Luke shook his head modestly. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it to survive and to keep everyone alive. Humans are good at surviving. That's all there is to it." She smiled, her heart full of pride. "Sometimes survival is enough to prove everything. You've done that, Luke. You've proven that humans cannot be underestimated, not in strength, not in courage, and not in intelligence." He looked out at the stars, calm as ever. "We survive, Lyra. That's what humans do. And we endure. That's the part that counts." In the following days, the Silver Dawn resumed its voyage through the trade lanes and spaceways. The crew moved with confidence, no longer fearful of the threats that might lie ahead. The Velari officers, once skeptical of human capability, now respected Luke as an equal, if not a superior in certain matters. The humans aboard were no longer frightened or uncertain. They had seen firsthand the power of calm thinking, observation, and strategy. Luke continued to work quietly, checking systems, offering guidance, and helping with repairs. He did not seek attention, but his influence was felt everywhere. Every door repaired, every vent secured, every trapped crew member guided to safety carried his touch. The crew no longer saw him as weak or ordinary. He was a symbol of human endurance, intelligence, and adaptability. One day, as the silver dawn passed a small, neutral planet, Lyra stood beside Luke and watched the crew moving efficiently through the corridors. "Do you realize," she said softly, "that what you did will be remembered, not just by this crew but across the galaxy? Humans will be seen differently now. You've changed that." Luke shook his head. "I don't need recognition. I just did what humans do. We survive, we endure. We act when necessary, that's enough." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "Sometimes what humans do is enough to inspire everyone else. You've done that, Luke, and I am proud to call you my husband." Luke looked at her, a small, humble smile on his face. "And I'm proud to be human. That's all that matters." The stars stretched endlessly before them, silent witnesses to the events that had changed lives aboard the Silver Dawn. Humans had shown their strength, not in muscle, not in weapons, but in intelligence, patience, and courage. They had survived when others expected them to fail. They had endured when others thought they would break. And Luke Carter, quiet, humble, and extraordinary in ways no one could have predicted, had proven it. As the ship sailed on, the crew settled into a new rhythm, confident, skilled, and aware of the truth that had been revealed. Humans were not weak. Humans survived. Humans endured. And the galaxy, if it learned of these events, would never again underestimate them. Luke stood beside Lyra, looking out at the endless stars, calm, steady, and confident. He had saved lives, changed perceptions, and shown the true power of humanity. And he did it all quietly, without seeking glory, without needing recognition, because humans did not fight for praise. They survived, and that alone was enough. Lyra rested her hand on his shoulder, feeling the quiet strength emanating from him. "We are ready for anything now," she said softly. Luke nodded. "We always were. Humans survive, Lyra, and we endure. That's the truth the galaxy will learn." And with that, the Silver Dawn continued its journey, the crew united, the ship intact, and humanity's strength proven beyond doubt. The stars outside were silent witnesses to the quiet power of a human who had turned weakness into victory and calmness into legend.